"Sir, you can't conduct business here. This is a private banking area." The security guard's voice cut through the expensive silence of First National Bank of Las Vegas. Pete Marconi didn't even look up from his tablet, where he was monitoring the flow of money through his legitimate businesses. 23 casinos, 14 restaurants, 6 construction companies, all perfectly legal fronts that kept his real empire running smoothly. "I own 40% of this bank," he said quietly. "I'll conduct business wherever I damn well please." The guard stepped back, recognizing the name that could end careers with a phone call. Pete continued scrolling through numbers that would make most people dizzy. Everything was flowing perfectly, profits up 18% from last month, when something caught his peripheral vision. A woman stumbled through the brass doors, her torn jeans and stained hoodie completely out of place among the marble columns and crystal chandeliers. Her long black hair hung in tangled waves around her shoulders, and even from across the room, Pete could see the confusion in her movements. Before I continue with this incredible story, I want to ask you to hit that subscribe button if you're enjoying this tale of unexpected love and dangerous secrets. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from all of you amazing viewers. And please, give this video a thumbs up to help others discover this story. Now back to our tale. The woman approached the customer service counter with hesitant steps. Pete found himself watching her instead of his financial reports, something that never happened. He built his fortune on focus, on never letting anything distract him from business. "I just want to see my account," she said to the teller, her voice carrying a slight tremor. The perfectly groomed banker looked her up and down with obvious distaste. "Ma'am, I'll need to see identification and—" "Please," the woman interrupted, her green eyes filling with desperation. "I know this sounds crazy, but I can't remember my last name. I think it starts with C, maybe. Gabriella something." Pete almost laughed out loud. Another con artist trying to scam the bank. He'd seen dozens of them over the years. People desperate enough to try anything for a quick score. But something about her demeanor made him pause. The tremor in her hands, the genuine confusion in her voice, the way she kept touching her temple like it hurt. The teller's expression hardened. "Ma'am, without proper identification, I cannot access any account information. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "But I know I have an account here," Gabriella insisted, her voice rising with panic. "I remember this building, these marble floors. Please, I'll give you my social security number, my birthday. I remember those." Pete found himself standing, walking toward the commotion. His usual entourage of bodyguards tensed, unsure why their boss was involving himself in what appeared to be a minor disruption. "What seems to be the problem here?" Pete's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The teller's demeanor changed instantly. "Mr. Marconi, this woman is claiming to have an account but has no identification. We were just explaining bank policy." "Let her try," Pete said, studying Gabriella's face. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her features, the way she favored her left side as if she'd been injured recently. "Sir, I really don't think—" "You heard me." Pete's tone left no room for argument. Gabriella looked up at him with those striking green eyes, a mix of gratitude and wariness crossing her features. "Thank you," she whispered. The teller's fingers flew across the keyboard with obvious reluctance. Pete watched Gabriella's face as she rattled off numbers. Social Security, birthday, even what she claimed was her mother's maiden name. Each piece of information she provided with increasing confidence, as if the act of speaking was helping her remember. "What year were you born?" the teller asked, clearly hoping to trip her up. 1999, Gabriella answered without hesitation. "March 15th. I remember because my mother always said I was born with the spring flowers." Pete calculated quickly. 25 years old. Young, but not so young that she couldn't have accumulated wealth. Though looking at her torn clothes and the dirt under her fingernails, it seemed unlikely. The computer screen flickered, and the teller's expression shifted from skepticism to shock, then to something approaching terror. She glanced between the screen and Gabriella several times before looking directly at Pete. "Sir," the teller's voice was barely above a whisper, "perhaps we should handle this in a private office." Now Pete was intrigued. "Show me the screen." "Mr. Marconi, bank privacy regulations. The lady asked me to help her. Show me the damn screen." The teller reluctantly turned the monitor. Pete's eyes widened as he read the account details. Current balance $847,562.891.43. Account holder, Gabriella Maria Castellano. Castellano. The name hit Pete like a physical blow. The Castellano family, Old money, older than his own empire, with connections that stretched from Wall Street to Washington, D.C. But they were supposed to be legitimate, completely removed from the world Pete operated in. Is that really my account? Gabriella's voice was small, disbelieving. Pete looked at her again, seeing her differently now. The bone structure that spoke of generations of good breeding, the way she held herself despite her obvious confusion. This wasn't some con artist. This was Gabriella Castellano, heir to one of the most powerful family fortunes on the East Coast. It appears so, Pete said carefully. The question is, why don't you remember who you are? Gabriella's hand went to her temple again, and Pete noticed for the first time the faint surgical scar hidden by her hairline. Someone had operated on her brain recently. I woke up 3 days ago in a hospital in Henderson, she said slowly. The doctors said I'd been in an accident, that I had amnesia from head trauma. They discharged me with papers saying I was Jane Doe because I couldn't remember my name. Pete's mind was racing. The Castellanos were known for their ruthless business practices, their ability to eliminate threats before they became problems. If Gabriella couldn't remember who she was, if she'd been conveniently placed in a hospital with no identity. Where have you been staying? He asked. A shelter downtown. So I've been doing odd jobs for cash, trying to figure out who I am. She looked at the account balance again. This doesn't feel real. Pete made a decision that went against every survival instinct he'd developed over 15 years in the criminal underworld. Come with me. What? You're not safe out there. Not with that much money at stake. Someone tried to erase you, Gabriella. Until we figure out who and why, you need protection. She studied his face, those green eyes searching for something. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Pete couldn't explain the pull he felt toward this woman. The way her vulnerability mixed with underlying strength appealed to something primal in him. Let's just say I have experience with people who want to eliminate threats to their power. Pete's black Escalade cut through Las Vegas traffic with practiced ease. Gabriella sat beside him in the leather interior, her eyes wide as she took in the city's glittering excess. She'd been quiet since leaving the bank, processing the magnitude of what they'd discovered. You said someone tried to erase me, she finally spoke. What did you mean? Pete glanced at her, noting how she unconsciously touched that surgical scar. That operation you had? Head trauma doesn't usually require that kind of precise surgical work. Someone wanted you to forget who you are. The color drained from Gabriella's face. But why? That's what we need to figure out. Pete pulled into the circular driveway of his penthouse building. But first, you need food, clean clothes, and somewhere safe to think. As they rode the private elevator to the 32nd floor, Pete found himself stealing glances at her. Beneath the grime and exhaustion, she was beautiful in a way that suggested expensive education and careful breeding, but there was something else, a spark of defiance that told him she wouldn't break easily. His penthouse overlooked the Strip, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the neon playground below. Gabriella moved to the windows as if drawn by a magnet, her reflection ghost-like against the glass. I remember this, she said softly. Not this exact view, but heights. I remember loving high places, feeling like I could see forever. Pete watched her from across the room, struck by the juxtaposition of fragility and strength in her posture. The Castellano family has a penthouse in Manhattan, 62nd floor of a building they own. She turned to face him. Tell me about them, about my family. Pete poured himself a scotch, offered her one. She declined with a shake of her head. They're old money established before my grandfather ever set foot in America. Banking, real estate, shipping, all legitimate businesses, but legitimate doesn't always mean clean. Are you saying my family is involved in... She struggled for the word. Let's just say the Castellanos have always been willing to use whatever methods necessary to protect their interests. Your great-grandfather allegedly had connections to certain Italian families back in the day. Gabriella sank into one of his leather chairs. And you? What exactly do you do, Pete Marconi? The question he'd been dreading. Pete studied her face, looking for judgment, fear, revulsion. I run businesses in Las Vegas, some more legitimate than others. Are you Mafia? The direct question surprised him. I prefer entrepreneur with flexible ethics. A small smile crossed her lips, the first real expression of lightness he'd seen from her. That's the most diplomatic way I've ever heard someone admit to being a criminal. Before Pete could respond, his phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Then another. His security system was detecting movement on multiple floors of the building. Professional movement, coordinated, purposeful. "We need to go. Now." Pete was already moving toward his safe, pulling out weapons and cash. "What's happening?" "Someone found out you're here." Pete handed her a gun. "Do you know how to use this?" Gabriella looked at the weapon, and something flickered in her eyes. Without hesitation, she checked the safety and examined the magazine with practiced efficiency. "I guess I do." The elevator dinged. Pete's blood went cold. His private elevator required a special key that only he possessed. The elevator doors opened to reveal 4 men in expensive suits, their movements precise and calculated. Professional killers, Pete realized, not street thugs, the kind of men who made problems disappear permanently. "Mr. Marconi," the lead man spoke with a slight Boston accent. "We're here for the girl." Pete stepped in front of Gabriella, his own weapon drawn. "She's under my protection." "This isn't your business, Marconi. The Castellano family is handling an internal matter." Gabriella stepped out from behind Pete, the gun steady in her hands. "I am a Castellano. This is my business." The man smiled coldly. "You're confused, miss. The head trauma was quite severe. You're not thinking clearly." "My thinking is perfectly clear." Gabriella's voice carried an authority that hadn't been there before, as if remembering who she was had awakened something buried. "I remember enough now. Uncle Vincent sent you, didn't he?" Pete saw the slight tightening around the man's eyes. Confirmation. "Your uncle is concerned about your condition. He wants to ensure you get proper medical care. What my uncle wants," Gabriella's voice turned to ice, "is to ensure I never remember what I saw the night before my accident." The pieces clicked into place for Pete. A family power struggle, money at stake, and Gabriella had been inconvenient enough that someone had decided to erase her rather than eliminate her completely. But now she was remembering. "What did you see?" Pete asked, not taking his eyes off the armed men. "Uncle Vincent meeting with someone in our New York office. Someone who shouldn't have been there." Gabriella's grip on the gun tightened. "Someone planning to take over our shipping contracts in the Northeast." The lead killer's patience was wearing thin. "Enough. Miss Castellano, you're coming with us. Mr. Marconi, step aside, and this doesn't have to involve you." Pete laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You came into my home, threatened a woman under my protection, and think I'm going to step aside? You clearly don't know who you're dealing with." "We know exactly who we're dealing with. A Vegas crime boss who's gotten too big for his territory. Your expansion into East Coast shipping was..." Noted. Now Pete understood. This wasn't just about Gabriella's memory. The Castellanos saw him as a threat, and eliminating both problems at once would be efficient. "So this is about business after all," Pete said. "It's always about business." The first shot came without warning. Pete dove left, pulling Gabriella with him behind his massive kitchen island. Gunfire erupted, expensive marble and wood exploding around them. "How many exits?" Gabriella shouted over the noise. "Service elevator, fire stairs, and the terrace." "Terrace is 32 floors up." "I know." Pete was already moving, laying down suppressing fire. "But I have a helicopter on the roof." Gabriella looked at him like he was insane. "Of course you do." They fought their way across the penthouse, Pete's years of experience showing in how he moved, how he anticipated the killer's positions. But Gabriella surprised him. She moved like someone with training, someone who knew how to handle herself in dangerous situations. As they reached the terrace door, Pete realized something that changed everything. Gabriella Castellano wasn't just a rich girl who'd witnessed something inconvenient. The way she fought, the way she thought tactically under pressure, she'd been trained for this. Which meant the Castellano family was far more involved in Pete's world than anyone had suspected. And if they were willing to kill their own niece to protect their secrets, they'd stop at nothing to eliminate Pete's growing empire. The rooftop of Pete's building offered a breathtaking view of Las Vegas spread out below, but neither of them had time to appreciate the scenery. The helicopter sat 30 yards away, rotors already spinning. Pete's pilot was always on standby for emergencies. "Go!" Pete shouted, providing cover as Gabriella sprinted across the roof. Behind them, the stairwell door exploded open. More men poured onto the roof, and Pete realized they'd been outmaneuvered. This wasn't just 4 killers, it was a full team, professionally coordinated. Gabriella reached the helicopter and dove inside. Pete was 10 feet away when the first sniper's bullet sparked off the concrete near his feet. He looked up to see shooters positioned on surrounding buildings. The Castellanos had planned this operation with military precision. "Pete!" Gabriella's voice carried over the rotor noise. "Get in!" He sprinted the last few feet and threw himself into the helicopter as bullets shattered the windshield. The pilot immediately lifted off, but they weren't clear yet. "They've got shooters on every building," the pilot reported calmly. "This is going to be interesting." As Las Vegas tilted beneath them, Pete found himself pressed against Gabriella in the confined space. Despite everything they'd just been through, he was acutely aware of her warmth, the way her eyes held his as adrenaline pumped through their systems. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for protecting me, for believing me. Don't thank me yet. We're far from safe." But as he looked into those green eyes, Pete realized that safety was the least of his concerns. Somewhere between the bank and the rooftop, Gabriella Castellano had become more than just someone he was protecting. She'd become someone he couldn't imagine losing. "Where are we going?" she asked. Pete made a decision that would change both their lives. "Somewhere your family will never find us. I have a compound outside the city, completely off the grid." "And then what?" "Then we figure out who we can trust and how to take down your uncle before he destroys both our families." Gabriella was quiet for a moment, processing everything. When she spoke again, her voice carried a determination that sent heat through Pete's chest. "He made a mistake when he tried to erase my memory instead of killing me outright." "What kind of mistake?" A smile played at the corners of her mouth, and for the first time Pete saw the steel beneath her beauty. "He gave me the chance to choose my own side in this war, and Pete, yeah, I choose you." The words hit Pete like lightning. As the helicopter carried them into the desert night, he realized that Gabriella Castellano wasn't just a woman he was protecting anymore. She was his partner, his equal, and possibly the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to him. Because Pete Marconi was falling in love with her, and in his world, love was the most dangerous gamble of all. Outside the windows, Las Vegas glittered like scattered diamonds, but Pete only had eyes for the woman beside him, who'd just turned his carefully controlled world completely upside down. The war between the families was just beginning, but Pete was no longer fighting alone. Pete's compound sat hidden in the Nevada desert, a fortress disguised as a luxury ranch. As their helicopter touched down on the private landing pad, Gabriella marveled at the sprawling property, solar panels gleaming under the stars, guard towers positioned strategically around the perimeter, and a main house that looked more like a modern castle than a hideout. "Welcome to my real home," Pete said as they walked toward the entrance, completely off the grid, self-sufficient and invisible to satellites. Inside, the compound was a contradiction, rustic Western charm mixed with cutting-edge technology. Multiple computer screens displayed security feeds from dozens of locations, while leather furniture and exposed wooden beams created an atmosphere of comfortable luxury. "Mr. Marconi," a voice called from the shadows. A woman in her 60s emerged, silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, her posture radiating authority. "I wasn't expecting guests." "Elena, meet Gabriella Castellano." "Gabriella, this is Elena Vasquez, my head of security, and the person who actually runs this place." Elena's eyes widened at the name. "Castellano, as in Vincent Castellano's family?" "His niece," Pete confirmed, "the one who supposedly died in a car accident 3 weeks ago." Gabriella felt a chill run down her spine. "I died." Elena moved to one of the computers, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "According to every major news outlet, Gabriella Maria Castellano died from injuries sustained in a single car accident outside Albany. There was even a funeral. The screen filled with newspaper headlines, obituaries and photos of Gabriella at charity events, graduation ceremonies and family gatherings. Seeing her own face in those images triggered a flood of returning memories. "I remember now," Gabriella whispered, sinking into a chair. "I was driving to meet someone who had information about Uncle Vincent's shipping deals. There was another car, it forced me off the road, and then—" She touched her surgical scar. "They kept me alive just long enough to extract whatever information I might have had, then wiped my memory and dumped me in that Nevada hospital." Pete knelt beside her chair, his hand covering hers. The simple touch sent electricity through both of them. "But you remembered something they didn't want you to remember. What was it?" Gabriella closed her eyes, concentrating. "The person I was meeting, they had documents proving that Uncle Vincent wasn't just expanding into new shipping territories. He was planning to take over the entire East Coast drug distribution network. But to do that, he needed to eliminate the current bosses who controlled those territories." Elena and Pete exchanged a look. Current bosses like me, Pete said grimly. The meeting I witnessed. Uncle Vincent was planning to use our family's legitimate shipping business to move product, and he was meeting with someone from the Torino family in Chicago. They were planning to divide up the entire eastern seaboard. Pete stood, pacing now. His mind was racing with the implications. A hostile takeover of that magnitude would require eliminating not just me, but the Santos family in Miami, the Romano organization in Boston, and at least 6 smaller operations. Mass assassination, Elena said quietly. For they're planning to wipe out half the organized crime families on the East Coast and take over their territories. Gabriella looked up at Pete with fear in her eyes. And it all starts with you. You're the test case. If they can eliminate your Vegas operation and make it look like a business dispute, the other families won't see the pattern until it's too late. Pete felt a surge of protective rage, unlike anything he'd ever experienced. This wasn't just about business anymore. Someone had tried to erase the woman he was falling in love with, had literally tried to delete her existence. When is this supposed to happen, he asked. I don't know. But the documents I saw, they mentioned a timeline, something about Easter Sunday being the perfect symbolic date for a resurrection of family power. Pete glanced at the calendar. Easter was 6 days away. 6 days to prepare for war, Elena said, reading his thoughts. But as Pete looked at Gabriella, saw the determination in her green eyes, he realized something else. The Castellanos had made a critical error. By trying to erase Gabriella's memory instead of killing her outright, they'd created their own worst enemy. Because Gabriella Castellano wasn't just a witness to their plans anymore. She was a woman with a fortune, insider knowledge and nothing left to lose, and she just declared herself on Pete's side. The war room in Pete's compound buzzed with activity as Elena coordinated with Pete's most trusted lieutenants. Maps covered every surface, marked with shipping routes, known Castellano holdings, and potential assassination targets. But Pete found himself distracted, watching Gabriella work. She'd changed into clothes Elena had provided, dark jeans and a black sweater that highlighted her natural beauty, but it was her transformation in attitude that captivated him. Gone was the confused, vulnerable woman from the bank. In her place sat someone who understood money, power and strategy with frightening clarity. The Castellano Shipping Company has contracts with 6 major ports, Gabriella explained, pointing to locations on the map. But Uncle Vincent has been secretly negotiating exclusive deals with smaller, private docks, places where cargo isn't inspected as thoroughly. Smart, Pete admitted. Use the legitimate business to establish presence, then shift the real operation to locations with less oversight. Exactly. And here's what really scares me. Gabriella pulled out a notebook, where she'd been reconstructing her memories. 3 months ago, my grandfather changed his will. I was supposed to inherit controlling interest in the company when I turned 26. Pete calculated quickly. When do you turn 26? Next week, April 22nd. The room went silent. Elena was the first to speak. They're not just planning to eliminate Pete and take over the East Coast. They're planning to steal your inheritance and use your family's legitimate fortune to fund a criminal empire. But if you're legally dead, Pete began, then Uncle Vincent inherits everything. My trust fund, my voting shares, my grandfather's personal accounts. Gabriella's voice turned bitter. $800 million becomes his war chest. Pete moved to stand behind her chair, his hands resting on her shoulders. The contact was meant to be comforting, but the heat that passed between them was anything but casual. Not if you're alive to claim it first. How? I've been declared dead. Even if I walk into a lawyer's office, it would take months to prove my identity and overturn the death certificate. Elena smiled grimly. Unless you never died in the first place. Both Pete and Gabriella turned to look at her. What do you mean? The car accident was real, but what if Gabriella Castellano wasn't in the car? What if someone else died, and the family identified the body incorrectly due to injuries that made identification difficult? Pete's eyes lit up with understanding. You're talking about faking a resurrection. I'm talking about proving that the wrong person was buried. It happens more often than people think, especially with accidents involving fire or water damage. Elena was already pulling up files on her computer. The accident report says the car caught fire after impact. If the body was burned beyond recognition, then DNA evidence could prove that whoever was buried wasn't actually Gabriella, Pete finished. Gabriella stood, moving to the window that overlooked the desert. But that would mean someone else really did die. Someone's daughter, someone's sister. Pete moved to stand beside her, close enough that he could smell her shampoo. Someone who was probably murdered specifically to take your place. Vincent's people didn't just try to erase your memory, Gabriella. They killed an innocent person to make your death convincing. The weight of that realization hit her like a physical blow. Someone had died because of her family's greed and ambition. Pete watched her shoulders shake and did something that surprised even him. He pulled her into his arms, holding her while she grieved for a stranger who died in her place. "We're going to stop him," Pete whispered into her hair. "We're going to stop all of them." Gabriella pulled back to look at him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why are you doing this for me? You barely know me." Pete cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had escaped. "Because the moment you chose my side in that helicopter, you became the most important person in my world." The air between them crackled with electricity. Gabriella's breathing quickened as Pete leaned closer, his intentions clear. When their lips met, it wasn't gentle or tentative. It was desperate, passionate, filled with the knowledge that they might not survive the coming war. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Gabriella rested her forehead against his chest. "This is insane. We've known each other for less than 24 hours. In our world, 24 hours can be a lifetime," Pete said softly. "And I'd rather spend whatever time we have left fighting beside you than hiding from what I feel." Eleanor cleared her throat from across the room. "Not to interrupt this beautiful moment, but we have company." On the security monitors, black SUVs were approaching the compound's outer perimeter. Too many vehicles, moving too fast. "How did they find us?" Pete demanded, already reaching for weapons. Gabriella's face went pale. "The helicopter. If Uncle Vincent has government connections, he could have tracked the flight path." Elena was barking orders into her radio, mobilizing the compound's defenses. 6 vehicles, probably 4 men each. We're outnumbered 3-1. Pete handed Gabriella a rifle, noting again how naturally she handled weapons. "Can you fight?" She chambered around with practiced efficiency. "Let's find out what other skills I inherited from the Castellano family." As the first explosions rocked the compound's outer walls, Pete realized that everything was about to change. They were no longer running or hiding. The war had come to them. The attack came in waves, each more coordinated than the last. Pete's compound, designed to be an impregnable fortress, held against the initial assault, but barely. Elena coordinated defensive positions from the control room, while Pete and Gabriella fought side by side on the main floor. "East wall breach." Elena's voice crackled over the intercom. "They're using military-grade explosives." Gabriella moved with fluid precision, her muscle memory revealing training she couldn't consciously remember. She fired in controlled bursts, never wasting ammunition, always finding cover before returning fire. Pete found himself watching her in amazement, even as bullets shattered windows around them. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" he shouted over the gunfire. "I wish I knew," Gabriella called back, dropping 2 attackers with clean headshots. "But right now I'm grateful for whatever training I had." A new sound filled the air. Helicopters. Multiple aircraft circling the compound, searchlights cutting through the darkness. Elena's voice came over the radio again, this time tight with concern. "Pete, we've got air support inbound. Government markings." Pete's blood went cold. Government involvement meant the Castellanos had resources beyond anything he'd anticipated. "How long until they land?" 2 minutes, maybe less. Gabriella appeared at his side, her face streaked with dust and determination. "There's something else I remember. Uncle Vincent has connections in the FBI, people who owe him favors from when our family helped fund anti-terrorism operations. Corrupt agents? Worse. Legitimate agents who think they're stopping a terrorist attack." Gabriella's eyes were bright with realization. "He probably told them you've taken a Castellano family member hostage, that you're planning something catastrophic." Pete understood immediately. To the arriving federal agents, this would look exactly like a rescue operation. They had no way of knowing that Gabriella was there voluntarily, that she was fighting to expose her own family's criminal plans. "We need to surrender," Pete said, the words tasting like poison. "No," Gabriella's voice was fierce. "If they take me into custody, Uncle Vincent will find a way to have me killed in federal protection, and they'll prosecute you for kidnapping. Then what do you suggest?" Gabriella was quiet for a moment, her mind racing. Then she smiled, her expression so cunning it reminded Pete that she was every bit as dangerous as the man who'd tried to erase her. "We give them what they want, we stage my rescue." Pete stared at her. Explain. I let them save me from you. Play the traumatized victim who's grateful to be rescued from the big bad Mafia boss. Meanwhile, you escape through the tunnels Elena mentioned, and I work from the inside to gather evidence against Uncle Vincent. Absolutely not. Pete's response was immediate and non-negotiable. I'm not letting you walk into that kind of danger alone. Pete, this is our only chance. If we both get captured, Uncle Vincent wins. If I play this right, I can access my family's records, find the evidence we need to expose the whole operation. The sound of helicopters was getting closer. Elena's voice crackled over the radio again. 30 seconds until touchdown. Gabriella grabbed Pete's face, forcing him to look at her. I need you to trust me. Trust that I'm strong enough to handle this. Pete saw the determination in her eyes, the steel beneath the beauty that had drawn him to her from the beginning. But he also saw something else, the same protectiveness he felt for her reflected back at him. Promise me something, he said. Anything. Promise me you'll come back to me. No matter what happens, no matter how long it takes, you find a way back to me. Gabriella's answer was a kiss that tasted like gunpowder and desperation, and promises neither of them was sure they could keep. When she pulled away, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I promise, but Pete. Yeah? If something happens to me, you make sure Uncle Vincent pays for everything he's done. You make him pay for the woman who died in my place, for trying to erase my memory, for all of it. Before Pete could respond, the compound's lights blazed to life as federal agents rappelled through skylights and burst through doors. Gabriella immediately dropped her weapon and raised her hands, her entire demeanor shifting. "Help me!" she screamed, her voice broken and terrified. "Please, he's been holding me prisoner." Pete met her eyes one last time across the chaos of shouting agents and tactical lights. In that look, he saw everything he needed to know. Gabriella Castellano wasn't just fighting for her inheritance or her life anymore. She was fighting for their future, and God help anyone who tried to stop her. As federal agents surrounded him, Pete allowed himself to be taken into custody, trusting the woman he loved to play the most dangerous role of her life. The game was just beginning. 3 days later, Gabriella sat in the back of a black sedan, watching the familiar skyline of New York City grow larger through bulletproof windows. The FBI had been surprisingly easy to manipulate. A traumatized heiress grateful to be rescued from a dangerous criminal was exactly the story they wanted to hear. Agent Sarah Chen sat beside her, reviewing files. "We'll have you back with your family within the hour, Miss Castellano. I'm sure your uncle is anxious to see you safe." Gabriella nodded, playing her part. "I still can't believe I survived. If you hadn't found me when you did, Marconi is a dangerous man. You're lucky to be alive." If only she knew, Gabriella thought. Pete had saved her life, not endangered it. But according to the federal agents, Pete Marconi was now in maximum security custody, facing charges that could put him away for life. The thought made her chest ache, but she forced herself to focus on the mission. The Castellano family mansion in Manhattan was exactly as she remembered. Imposing limestone facade, private security, old money displayed in every carefully chosen detail. Uncle Vincent waited in the foyer, his arms spread wide in a performance of familial joy. "Gabriella, my dear girl," he embraced her. And she forced herself not to recoil from his touch. "We thought we'd lost you forever." "The doctors say my memory is still fragmented," Gabriella said carefully, "but it's starting to come back." She saw the flash of concern in Vincent's eyes before he covered it with another smile. "Don't worry about that now. You're home, you're safe. That's all that matters." But Gabriella was already cataloging details, the way Vincent's security team positioned themselves to watch her, the subtle changes in the mansion's layout that suggested new surveillance equipment, the way her uncle's assistant made notes every time she spoke. That evening, alone in her childhood bedroom, Gabriella began her real work. The room had been searched. She could tell by the way her belongings had been carefully repositioned, but Vincent's people had missed the most important hiding place, behind a loose baseboard, exactly where she'd hidden diary entries as a teenager. Gabriella found what she was looking for. A small device Pete had slipped to her during their final kiss, a sophisticated recording and communication device Elena had designed. "Can anyone hear me?" she whispered into the device. Elena's voice crackled back immediately. "We're here, sweetheart. Are you safe?" "For now." "Vincent suspects I might remember more than I'm letting on, but he's being careful." "How's Pete?" "Angry, worried, and planning something reckless. The federal charges are serious, but we have lawyers working on it. I need to move fast. Vincent's planning something for Easter Sunday, and that's 4 days away. What do you need? Gabriella thought quickly. Access to the family's private computer system, all the shipping records, financial transfers, communication logs, everything from the past 6 months. The system is probably encrypted. Leave that to me. I designed half the security protocols myself before my accident. For the next 3 days, Gabriella played the perfect recovering victim while systematically infiltrating her own family's criminal network. She accessed shipping manifests that revealed drug shipment schedules, financial records showing payments to corrupt officials, and most damning of all, communication logs between Vincent and known crime bosses from Chicago to Miami. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Vincent hadn't just planned to eliminate Pete and take over East Coast operations. He'd orchestrated a complete restructuring of organized crime in America, with himself as the central authority. But it was the final piece of evidence that made Gabriella's blood run cold. Hidden in Vincent's personal files, she found detailed psychological profiles of every target family, including intimate knowledge of their personal lives, family members, and vulnerabilities. Vincent had been planning this takeover for years, gathering blackmail material and identifying pressure points. And there, in Pete's file, was information that could only have come from someone very close to him. Someone in Pete's inner circle was feeding information to Vincent Castellano. Gabriella activated the communication device with trembling fingers. Elena, we have a problem. There's a mole in Pete's organization. The silence stretched for several seconds before Elena responded, her voice tight. Are you sure? Vincent has intelligence about Pete's operations, personal details, security protocols. Someone's been reporting to him for months. Who? The files don't say, but Elena... Gabriella paused, hating what she had to say next. Vincent knows about Pete's compound. He knows about the tunnels, the safe rooms, everything. If Pete tries to go back there, it's a trap. Elena's voice was grim. He's walking into a trap. Gabriella closed her eyes, fear coursing through her. Where is he now? He escaped federal custody 6 hours ago. He's on his way to the compound to mount a rescue operation for you. The room seemed to spin around Gabriella. Pete was walking into certain death, and she was the only person who could warn him. But doing so would blow her cover and probably get them both killed, unless she could find a way to eliminate Vincent's entire operation in one decisive strike. Gabriella made a decision that would either save the man she loved or destroy them both. She began downloading every file in Vincent's system, every piece of evidence that could expose the conspiracy. Tomorrow was Easter Sunday. Tomorrow, one way or another, this war would end. Easter Sunday dawned gray and cold over New York City. Gabriella sat in the family chapel, surrounded by relatives who had no idea they were complicit in their patriarch's criminal empire. Uncle Vincent delivered a moving sermon about resurrection and renewal, his words carrying a double meaning that chilled Gabriella to the bone. Today was the day. The coordinated attacks on 6 crime families would begin at sunset, time to occur when families were gathered for holiday dinners. The symbolism wasn't lost on Gabriella. Vincent wanted to destroy his enemies while they celebrated life and renewal. Her communication device had been silent all morning. Either Elena and her team were maintaining radio silence, or something had gone very wrong. Gabriella checked her watch. 3 hours until the attacks began. After the service, Vincent approached her with his usual facade of caring concern. You seem troubled, my dear. Still having memory issues? Actually, Uncle Vincent, Gabriella said, making a decision that would change everything. My memory has been returning quite clearly, especially memories from the night of my accident. The change in Vincent's expression was subtle but unmistakable. The warmth left his eyes, replaced by something cold and calculating. I see. And what exactly do you remember? I remember the documents, the shipping manifests, the meeting with Anthony Torino. Gabriella kept her voice level despite the fear racing through her veins. I remember you planning to eliminate Pete Marconi and take over the entire East Coast. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. When he finally spoke, his voice carried no pretense of familial affection. I was hoping the memory loss would be permanent. It would have been so much simpler. Simpler than what? Than having to kill my own niece twice. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Gabriella realized that every moment she'd spent in the mansion, Vincent had been deciding whether she posed enough of a threat to eliminate permanently. "You can't kill me here," Gabriella said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Too many witnesses, too many questions." Vincent smiled, and the expression was genuinely terrifying. "Who says anything about killing you here? This afternoon you're going to suffer a tragic relapse. The head trauma will prove too severe, and you'll need immediate medical attention. Unfortunately, there will be complications during transport to the hospital." Another accident? Another tragedy. The Castellano family has experienced such terrible losses lately. Gabriella's mind raced, calculating options. She had the evidence to bring down Vincent's entire operation, but only if she could survive long enough to deliver it. "What makes you think I haven't already told someone what I know? Because if you had, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Vincent signaled to two of his security men who moved to flank Gabriella. "You've been under surveillance since the moment you arrived. Every phone call monitored, every conversation recorded. The only person you've spoken to privately is yourself." He was right, and they both knew it. Gabriella's communication device had sophisticated encryption, but if Vincent had the right technology, he might have detected its transmissions even without breaking the code. "There is one thing I'm curious about," Vincent continued conversationally. "How did you develop feelings for Marconi so quickly? Stockholm Syndrome? Or did you genuinely believe you could reform a killer?" The question revealed something important. Vincent didn't understand what had really happened between her and Pete. He saw it as either psychological manipulation or naive romanticism, not recognizing the genuine partnership they'd formed. "You don't understand him at all," Gabriella said. "That's why you're going to lose." Vincent laughed. "Marconi is dead, my dear. His compound was raided this morning. Apparently he tried to resist arrest and was killed in the firefight." The world seemed to tilt around Gabriella. If Pete was dead, then everything they'd planned, everything they'd fought for, was meaningless. But something in Vincent's tone suggested he wasn't entirely certain of his information. "You're lying," she said, hoping her voice didn't betray her desperation. "Am I? Would you like to see the news reports?" Vincent nodded to one of his men, who produced a tablet showing breaking news coverage. Federal agents had indeed raided Pete's compound that morning, but the reports were vague about casualties. No bodies had been identified yet, no confirmation of deaths. It could be true, or it could be Vincent trying to break her spirit before the final act of his plan. Either way, Gabriella knew she was out of time. In a few hours, 6 families would be murdered, Vincent would control the East Coast criminal empire, and she would be permanently silenced, unless she could turn the tables one final time. "I want to make a deal," Gabriella said. Vincent raised an eyebrow. "You're hardly in a position to negotiate." "I am if I'm the only person who can give you what you really want." "Which is?" Gabriella smiled, and for the first time since entering the mansion, she let Vincent see the steel beneath her performance. Complete access to grandfather's private accounts, the ones he hid from the federal government, the ones worth more than my public inheritance. Vincent's expression shifted to genuine interest. "I'm listening. 800 million in public assets, yes, but 3 billion in private holdings that only I can access. Swiss accounts, cryptocurrency wallets, art collections held under false names." Gabriella was making half of it up, but the part about hidden assets was true. Her grandfather had been paranoid about government seizure. The access codes died with him, except for the copies he gave me on my 18th birthday. She could see the greed warring with suspicion in Vincent's eyes. "Why would you offer me this now?" "Because I'm tired of running. Because I'm tired of being afraid, and because I'd rather be rich and alive than broke and dead." Vincent considered this for a long moment. "If you're lying, then you kill me anyway. But if I'm telling the truth, you're about to become one of the most powerful men in America." The decision was visible on Vincent's face. Greed won. "Where are these access codes?" he asked. Gabriella stood, projecting confidence she didn't feel. "In the family safe, but I'll need to access it personally, biometric locks." As they moved through the mansion toward her grandfather's private study, Gabriella prayed that Pete was still alive, that Elena had received her transmissions, and that she could buy enough time for whatever rescue operation might be coming, because she was about to bet both their lives on the hope that Vincent Castellano's greed was greater than his caution. The family safe was a masterpiece of old-world craftsmanship and modern security, hidden behind a false panel in her grandfather's study. Vincent watched carefully as Gabriella placed her hand on the biometric scanner, his 2 guards positioned to stop any sudden movements. The safe opened with a soft hiss, revealing documents, jewelry, and most importantly, a collection of encrypted drives that represented decades of carefully hidden wealth. Gabriella reached for one of the drives, her fingers brushing against something else, a small device her grandfather had installed years ago, a silent alarm that connected directly to federal law enforcement. "Careful," Vincent warned, but his attention was focused on the drives, calculating the fortune they represented. Gabriella palmed the alarm device and activated it in one smooth motion, then handed Vincent the encrypted drive. "This contains the primary accounts, but you'll need my password to access them." Vincent examined the drive, his greed temporarily overriding his suspicion. "And what do you want in exchange for this password?" "Safe passage out of the country, and 10% of whatever you access." 5%. 7.5. "And you have a deal?" Vincent nodded, but Gabriella could see the lie in his eyes. He had no intention of honoring any agreement once he had what he wanted. "The password?" he prompted. Gabriella was about to respond when the mansion's security alarms began blaring. Red lights flashed in the hallway outside the study, and Vincent's radio crackled with urgent voices. "Sir, we have federal agents at the main gate. They have a warrant." Vincent's expression darkened. "How many agents?" "Multiple vehicles, tactical gear. This isn't a courtesy visit." Vincent looked at Gabriella with sudden understanding. "You activated something when you opened the safe." "Insurance policy," Gabriella said calmly. "Grandfather installed a federal alert system in case the family assets were ever threatened by hostile forces. Even he didn't trust you completely, Uncle Vincent." The sound of helicopters filled the air, growing closer. Vincent's guards were getting nervous, looking toward the windows as tactical lights swept across the mansion grounds. "Sir, we need to evacuate," one of the guards urged. "The federal team includes financial crimes specialists. If they seize the safe, they'll find evidence of every illegal transaction you've made in the past 5 years, Gabriella finished. "Bank records, payment authorizations, communication logs with your criminal contacts. Everything I've been collecting while pretending to recover from amnesia." Vincent's mask of civilized authority finally slipped completely. "You clever little bitch. You've been playing me from the moment you walked through that door." "Actually, I've been playing you from the moment you tried to erase my memory." Gabriella stood, no longer bothering to hide her satisfaction. "Every file you showed me, every detail you revealed about your operation, every conversation we had, I recorded all of it." The study door exploded inward as federal agents flooded the room, weapons drawn. But instead of chaos, there was a moment of perfect stillness as everyone assessed the situation. Then Vincent made a desperate choice. He grabbed Gabriella, pulling her against him with a gun pressed to her temple. "Everyone stay back!" Vincent shouted. "I walk out of here or she dies." Agent Chen appeared in the doorway, her weapon trained on Vincent. "There's nowhere to run, Mr. Castellano. Release your niece and we can discuss terms." "Terms?" Vincent laughed bitterly. "I know what kind of terms you offer. Life in federal prison if I'm lucky." Gabriella felt the gun barrel pressed against her skin and forced herself to remain calm. Vincent was desperate now, which made him dangerous, but also predictable. Desperate people made emotional decisions. "Uncle Vincent," she said quietly, "you don't want to kill me. Why not? You've destroyed everything I worked for. Because I'm the only person who can access those 3 billion in hidden assets. Kill me and that money disappears forever." Even in his desperation, Vincent's greed was a constant. Gabriella felt his grip loosen slightly as he considered the fortune he'd be giving up. It was the opening she needed. Gabriella twisted away from Vincent's gun, using movements that came from muscle memory she didn't even know she possessed. Vincent's shot went wide, and federal agents swarmed him before he could fire again. As Vincent was wrestled to the ground and read his rights, Gabriella found herself shaking with a combination of relief and exhaustion. It was over. The conspiracy was exposed, the evidence secured, and Vincent would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. But there was still one piece missing. "Agent Chen," Gabriella said, "I need to know about Pete Marconi. The report said he was killed resisting arrest." Chen looked uncomfortable. "Miss Castellano, I understand you may feel conflicted about Mr. Marconi, given your captivity, but he's a dangerous criminal." "He saved my life," Gabriella interrupted. "And he helped me gather the evidence to stop my uncle. If he's dead, he's not dead," a familiar voice said from the doorway. Gabriella spun around to see Pete standing in the entrance to the study. flanked by FBI agents but not in custody. He looked tired, worried, and absolutely beautiful. The raid on the compound was staged, Agent Chen explained. Mr. Marconi's legal team negotiated a cooperation agreement in exchange for his testimony against the Castellano organization. Gabriella didn't hear the rest of the explanation. She ran toward Pete, and he caught her in his arms, lifting her off the ground in an embrace that felt like coming home. "You promised to come back to me," Pete whispered into her hair. "I keep my promises," Gabriella whispered back, then pulled away to look at his face. "Even the dangerous ones." As federal agents continued processing the crime scene around them, Gabriella and Pete stood in the center of the chaos, holding each other like anchors in a storm. The war was over. They had won. And somehow, against all odds, they had both survived to see what came next. 6 months later, Gabriella stood on the terrace of Pete's penthouse, watching the sun set over Las Vegas. The city sparkled below them, a glittering testament to dreams and second chances. In her hand, she held a glass of champagne, celebrating not just the evening, but the life they'd built together from the ashes of Vincent's conspiracy. Pete appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "Penny, for your thoughts. Just thinking about how different everything is now." Gabriella leaned into his warmth, marveling at how natural this felt. How right. 6 months ago I was a woman with no memory and no identity. Now you're the CEO of a legitimate shipping empire and the woman who brought down one of the most ambitious criminal conspiracies in modern history. Pete pressed a kiss to her temple. "And you're mine." Gabriella turned in his arms, smiling at the possessive note in his voice. "Yours, huh?" Pretty confident for a man who had to completely restructure his business model. Pete's transformation had been as dramatic as her own. With Vincent's organization dismantled and federal attention focused on cleaning up organized crime, Pete had chosen to legitimize his operations completely. His casinos, restaurants, and construction companies were now entirely legal enterprises, though no less profitable. "I prefer to think of it as evolution," Pete said, his amber eyes warm with humor. "Besides, legitimate business is much more fun when you have the right partner." Their business partnership had developed alongside their personal relationship. Gabriella's inheritance, once she'd legally reclaimed her identity, had provided the capital for Pete's transition to legitimate operations. Together, they'd created an empire built on legal foundations, but with the strategic thinking that had served them both in darker times. "Speaking of partnerships," Pete said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I have something for you." Gabriella's heart stopped as he dropped to one knee, producing a ring that caught the last rays of sunlight and threw them back like captured fire. The diamond was flawless, set in platinum with smaller stones that formed an intricate pattern around the central gem. "Gabriella Maria Castellano," Pete said, his voice roughened with emotion. "6 months ago, you walked into my life and turned everything upside down. You made me want to be better than I was, stronger than I thought possible. You gave me something I never thought I'd have, a chance at a real future." Gabriella's eyes filled with tears as she looked down at this man who had saved her in every way that mattered. "Pete, I know we've done everything backwards, fell in love during a war, built a business empire while testifying against criminals, planned our future while dodging federal investigations." Pete's smile was soft, vulnerable, in a way she'd only seen in their most private moments. "But I don't want to wait anymore. I want to marry you, officially and completely. I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life and never have to wonder if you're safe, because I'll be right there protecting you." "Is that your proposal?" Gabriella asked, laughing through her tears. "A promise of eternal protection." "That's my promise of eternal love," Pete corrected. "The protection is just a bonus." Gabriella looked at the ring, at the man holding it, at the city spreading out below them like a constellation of possibilities. 6 months ago, she'd been a lost woman asking to see her bank account, and he'd been a criminal who mocked her appearance. Now they were partners in every sense of the word, equals who had chosen to face the world together. "Yes," she said, kneeling down to meet him at eye level. "Yes to all of it. The marriage, the partnership, the protection, the love, all of it." Pete slipped the ring onto her finger, with hands that shook slightly, then cupped her face and kissed her with a passion that spoke of relief, joy and promises kept. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gabriella rested her forehead against his. "I love you, Pete Marconi," she whispered. "I love your strength, your intelligence, your willingness to change for something better." I love that you saw who I really was even when I couldn't remember myself. I love you too. Gabriella Castellano, soon to be Gabriella Marconi. Pete's smile was radiant. I love your courage, your brilliance, your ability to turn a desperate situation into a winning strategy. I love that you chose to trust me with your heart, even when every logical instinct told you to run. As they stood together on the terrace, the ring catching the light of the setting sun, Gabriella thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had started with a simple request to see her bank account and had led to love, partnership, and a future neither of them could have imagined. Vincent Castellano was spending the rest of his life in federal prison. His conspiracy had been dismantled, his co-conspirators prosecuted, his criminal empire scattered to the winds. The woman who had died in Gabriella's place had been properly identified and laid to rest, her family finally able to grieve properly. Justice had been served, love had triumphed, and two people who had seemed destined to destroy each other had instead chosen to build something beautiful together. As the last rays of sunlight faded over Las Vegas, Pete and Gabriella returned to their penthouse, ready to begin planning not just a wedding, but a lifetime of adventures yet to come. Some love stories begin with chance encounters in coffee shops or romantic meet-cutes at parties. Theirs had begun with desperation, danger, and a simple request that had changed everything. I just want to see my account, she had said, and what she had found was worth far more than money. She had found her soulmate, her partner, and the love of her life. In the end, that was the most valuable account of all.